Welcome to the Simply Imperfect Podcast. If you're on the hunt for perfection, you may want to keep looking because we are imperfection at its finest around here. However, if you're looking to have conversations covering the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between about life, you've come to the right place. We not only embrace life's imperfections around here, we celebrate them. So for those of you who've decided to join us on this journey, go grab yourself a beverage, sit down, settle in, and let's get started. Welcome back to the Simply Imperfect Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to do a little bit of a update from an episode that was previously done in season 1. And so if you haven't already listened to the Kristin Smart episode, I would pause here and go on back and listen to it first because you're going to be a little bit lost. But to do a quick road so far, what we've already covered, Kristin Smart is a Cal Poly student who disappeared, and she was 19 at the time. I do believe I said her date of birth wrong in the first episode. It was February 20th of 1977. I think I said 1997. So Kristin was in her freshman year at the California Cal Poly University, and on May 25th of 1996, Kristin went missing. Unfortunately, since she went missing on the Friday of a holiday weekend, it took the campus university police a little bit of time to take her not showing up in her dorm room seriously. But when they finally did start investigating, they were able to piece together a timeline of the last known hours of Kristin and where she was and who she was interacting with. So starting out on Friday night, Kristin and a friend went looking for some parties. The friend, the fellow dorm mate, was pretty hesitant to do this, but Kristin was very insistent. And while they did find a party, it was described as not very exciting, and Kristin wanted to keep looking and the friend did not. So they parted ways and Kristin kept looking. Kristin was later seen at a party where I described this in the first podcast, so if you want more details, she gets fairly intoxicated and is later found in the front lawn of the house that is next to the house where the party was. And two fellow Cal Poly students, Tim Davis and Cheryl Anderson, are the ones that find Kristin. And they help her to her feet. They start helping her back to campus. They say that she needed quite a bit of assistance to stand up. And on their way back, they are joined by Paul Flores. Just a little bit of a note here. I do incorrectly, at least one point in the first episode, call him Paul Ramirez or Rodriguez. That is incorrect. His name is Paul Flores. As they get closer to campus, each person's dorm is different. So they start kind of breaking off and going to their own dorms. First Tim, then Cheryl, and Paul tells Cheryl, "Don't worry, I'll get her to her dorm." And so Cheryl goes into her dorm. Well, as you can kind of see where this is going, Kristin never makes it to her dorm. Kristin's roommate shows up the next morning. Kristin is not in her dorm. She doesn't know where she is. She hasn't been in contact with her. And there are several other people in the dorm that express the same concerns, and they go to campus police. When investigators are finally able to talk to Paul, Paul's story is, allegedly, you can see the door to Kristin's dorm from the door Paul went into his dorm from. And he said that he watched her get to the dorm and then went inside and he never saw her again. The fact that Paul was the last to see Kristin makes him immediately somebody investigators want to talk more to. And if you listen to the first episode of this little Kristin Smart miniseries, you be able to go into a more in-depth kind of breakdown of the original investigation, but ultimately they questioned Paul. There are inconsistencies in his story. There were people did not describe Paul well. He was one of those people that made your spidey sense go off. People weren't often very comfortable with him. A couple of the things that piqued investigators' interest is, one, he had a black eye, and his story about the black eye changed. He claimed it was during a basketball game. The date and time of that game changed. The person who played basketball with him ultimately came out and said that he had the black eye when they played basketball. There was some story about him installing a radio in his car, but it was a black eye on his right eye. And I have a hard time understanding how, if the story that he tells about getting a black eye and hitting it on the steering wheel is true, I don't quite understand the gymnastics you have to do to hit your right eye on a steering wheel. No matter if you're in the passenger seat or the driver's seat, I feel like that would be difficult. So the black eye draws the investigators' attention. Additionally, they did a search of the dorm. Now, the search of the dorm was done after students had been moved out and after cleaning services would have gone through, but several different dogs hit on the same room, the same bed, the same corner, and the same trash can. They were searching independently of each other. And the dogs all hit on the same room, which was Paul's, on the same bed, which was Paul's, on the same mattress that was Paul's, on the same garbage can that was Paul's. And to add to that, Paul's roommate that weekend was out of town. So you've got dogs hitting on human remains in the bedroom, a bedroom that Paul had all by himself during the weekend that Kristin went missing, and has a black eye. Now, I end the first episode talking about how during an interview, Paul gets up and says he has to leave to go take care of cement. The reason this is eerie and important to note is neighbors claim to have seen Paul and his father doing work immediately following Kristin's disappearance. They talked about how there were new planter boxes and new lattices installed. Additionally, future renters of the residence talks about how one of the planter boxes never was able to grow anything and how there were a couple feet of soil and then immediately below the soil was cement. It is important to note that early in the investigation of this, the investigators and forensic specialists were searching, doing warrants, and collecting information. And in the early days, there was something like 18 search warrants executed, and that there were 37 items that were collected and submitted for DNA processing. Additionally, from 2011 to 2020, they recovered 140 new items of evidence and conducted 91 more interviews. But it was spring of 2020 that things really began to ramp up in this case. So before we get into the current updates with the Kristin Smart case, I wanted to take a quick second and talk to you about a company that I've gotten to partner with. Grunt Style is an American and veteran-owned clothing line. Their line has something really for anybody. Whether you're looking for something that is patriotic, that supports first responders or a specific military branch. Even right now they have stuff for hunting season and Halloween. Whatever you're looking for, I guarantee you can find it at Grunt Style. So if you head on over to gruntstyle.com and use the discount code Simply Imperfect 25, you will save 25% off your order. It's really the best of all worlds. You get some awesome clothing, you get to support a veteran and American-owned company, and you're supporting the podcast. All right, let's get back into it. Around April 12th of 2020, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant on both Paul and Ruben Flores' homes. Now, Paul's father is Ruben. At the time of executing the search warrant, Paul Flores, who, as you know, was a student with Kristin at Cal Poly at the time, is now 44 years old. Think about the amount of time that has passed between her disappearance and today, and how much of life Kristin has missed living. So now, while the Sheriff's Department executed the search warrant, it was reported that while they were in the home, sounds of sawing and drilling could be heard coming from the inside of the garage. Tony Cipolla, who is the public information officer for the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department, was quoted as saying, "I can tell you that items were found both inside the homes and outside of the homes." Tony Cipolla also went on to explain that ground-penetrating radar was used and actual physical digging was used to search under the deck. Later, the San Luis Obispo County District Attorney, Dan Dowell, was quoting as saying, "We do believe that we have the location where the body was originally buried." And he went on to say, "We certainly believe that Mr. Flores' dorm room is the original crime scene." Additionally, a 1985 Volkswagen that is registered to Paul's parents, Ruben and Susan, was hauled away after being searched by cadaver dogs. And then on April 13th, both Paul and Ruben were arrested. This is what the charging document has to say. Now I'm going to skip over the listing of all the penal codes, but I will tag this in the show notes, so if you want to go through and read the complaint yourself, you can. Count 1. On or about May 25th, 1996, a felony was committed in that Paul Ruben Flores did unlawfully and with malice aforethought murder KS, a human being. It is further alleged, as to count 1, that the murder was committed while the defendant was engaged in the commission of or attempting to commit the crime of rape. The people hereby give notice of the people's intent to admit evidence of prior sexual acts. These prior sexual acts include the prior incidents described in the investigative reports and audio or video provided to the defense, and any other alleged incidents of abuse, which will be provided as they are obtained by the prosecution. On or between May 25th, 1996 and April 13th, 2021, in the county of San Luis Obispo, state of California, the crime of accessory after the fact, a felony was committed in that Ruben Ricardo Flores, unlawfully having knowledge that the crime of murder, a felony, had been committed by Paul Ruben Flores, did harbor, conceal, and aid said Paul Ruben Flores, with the intent that Paul Ruben Flores might avoid and escape from arrest, trial, conviction, and punishment for said felony. Paul and Ruben appeared before a judge on April 19th, where they both pled not guilty. Paul Flores was originally set for a bail of $250,000, but it was later reduced to $50,000, and if he posted, he would need to wear an electronic ankle monitor, give up his passport, and stay in San Luis Obispo County. On July 19th, a judge ordered Paul to remain in custody in the San Luis Obispo County Jail while he awaits for trial. In making this decision to keep Paul in custody, Superior Court Judge Craig B. Van Ruin, and side note, I may be saying his name wrong, but anyways, the Superior Court judge said that in support of his ruling, he made this decision because there was a, quote, substantial likelihood, unquote, that Flores would pose a danger to the public. He also noted that there was additional information that was submitted under seal by investigators indicating that Paul may have sexually assaulted other women, and that all of this information, in addition to the charges and the evidence that had been produced, is the reason why he ruled for Paul to stay in custody. On August 2nd, 2021, a preliminary hearing was held and 22 days of testimony occurred. And during this time, the district attorney called witnesses to testify to help lay the foundation for what is really looking to be a very circumstantial case. So a woman named Jennifer Hudson testified that Flores told her, quote, "I'm done playing with her and I put her out underneath my ramp." Hudson says that she was told this in 1996 by Paul, but she didn't inform lead investigators until 2019. Once again, the classmate who had previously told investigators about the black eye that Paul had, that Paul claims he got during a basketball game, and this classmate says no, he had it when he showed up for the basketball game, and his explanations to him were very inconsistent. And then there were additional classmates that testified that even though Flores claims to have never been in or around Smart's dorm, that they did witness him hanging around, and that his statements and their witness accounts contradict each other. The district attorney went on to paint a picture for the judge, much of what we've discussed on this podcast, but that Kristin had gone to a party, had passed out for a few hours, and while friends were helping her to get home, Paul, quote, came out of the darkness and told friends on multiple occasions that he would get her home. Additional witnesses testified about how Flores would keep people away from the area below the deck of his home, and that the area had been dug up and refilled. An ex-girlfriend of Paul's testified that while she was at the home, she was once told to get away from the area when she was trying to pick an avocado. A former renter of the home told a similar story. In regards to the holes that were dug in the soil behind the home, the state had experts testify. One expert testified to a lack of consistency in the sandy soil and a, quote, bathtub ring along the side of the wall. The expert stated that this was a, quote, good indication of a human burial site and that its contents were later removed. He also testified to fibers being recovered that could have also been consistent with Smart's clothes. Additional experts testified that traces of human blood were found under the deck along with stains in the soil and a disturbance in the earth the size of a human body. During the hearing, the state tried to bring in testimony regarding sexual assaults and drugging of women. In addition, they moved the court to be able to add rape charges from 2011 and 2017 involving 2 women in Los Angeles. The state used the argument that these incidents further established the building blocks needed to prove that Paul had a history of assaulting women. The judge denied this request, stating that even though the state is alleging that an assault had happened prior to the offense of murder, that there is no proof that there was a sexual assault in Kristin's case. Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, claims that these new charges amount to nothing other than a publicity stunt. The state brought additional witnesses to further explain the items that were found during search warrant searches in Paul's belongings. They said that homemade videos of Flores having sex with women who appeared to be intoxicated were found. They discovered prescription drugs that could have been used in the commission of date rape, and evidence of videos on Flores' hard drive that depict rape of intoxicated women. So if you look at the evidence and the testimony that the state brought forth in this hearing, it sounds like Paul may have a history here of assaulting in various forms intoxicated women, which sets the foundation of what they think happened to Kristin. So the same judge who made the ruling that Paul must remain in custody until his trial is also the judge who sat for this hearing, and the judge stated that he had a strong suspicion that Smart was murdered and buried underneath Ruben Flores' house deck, but that it would be up to a jury to decide whether the charges can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. He further went on to say, with a lack of DNA, quote, nothing links it definitely to Mrs. Smart, but it leads to a, quote, strong suspicion it was Mrs. Smart's remains. Defense attorneys said that prosecutors did not present enough evidence during the preliminary hearing to support the criminal charges. Defense attorney Robert Sanger claims that there was no consistent theory about where Smart's body went and no proof of what happened to her. And after noting that a former boyfriend had left burned shoes on Smart's doorstep, Singer said, I'm not saying that the ex-boyfriend killed her. Quote, I'm saying there's no evidence anyone had done it. So the preliminary hearing basically is a mini trial. The state brought their evidence, brought their witnesses, the defense was able to cross-examine. They presented just to the judge for the judge to decide whether the information that the state has provides enough probable cause to move forward to an official trial. Preliminary hearings don't happen in all cases. Some defendants waive them, but in bigger cases like this, especially in California, I see preliminary hearings happening more often there than I do in other districts. So now that they have completed the preliminary hearing, the judge has ruled that there's probable cause. Paul and Ruben have been set to be arraigned on October 20th, 2021 before a San Luis Obispo County Superior Court. It's a little bit confusing in these cases because it appears that there's a bit of duplication. So a complaint has been filed, and that's the information I read to you. The defendants have a right to a preliminary hearing, and then if probable cause is found, then it would move and information would be filed. In the jurisdictions that I've worked in, the complaint and the information are very similar. The difference is this. When I was working in Montana, there was a lower court called Justice Court, and there was a higher court called District Court. And Justice Court did not have the ability to hear a trial on a felony charge, but they could see a case that was a federal charge. Let me explain. There was a Justice Court judge who held appearances every single day. And so a complaint would be filed in Justice Court, even though it was a felony, and they would appear before the judge, and the judge would set bond. This just allowed a defendant to get before a judge quickly and timely. Then the information would be filed with the district court, which then it would get assigned to the district court judge, who would handle everything, the trial, the appearance, everything in regards to that case, even though it started in Justice Court, even though Justice Court can't accept a guilty plea or run a trial on a felony charge. Some places do it slightly different, but that is kind of the idea, and that's why there was a complaint filed in this case, and now an information will be filed. Those are very similar things. They lay out the facts and the allegations that are being made against the defendant. Something that I wasn't aware of when I first started researching this case for the first episode was that in 1997, Kristin Smart's family actually filed a wrongful death lawsuit. And it seems as though that the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office was subpoenaed for records in response to the investigation, and that San Luis Obispo County has been fighting the release of those records since then, and that in 2003, a San Luis Obispo Superior Court judge ruled that the necessity of preserving the confidentiality of the criminal investigation outweighed the Smarts' interest in the civil suit and postponed accepting any discovery or the court going any further on the civil case at that time. The court ordered an annual review to check on the status of the criminal case, including sealed declarations of the sheriff's office detectives to ensure the investigators remained working on the case, and that if they didn't continue working on the case, the civil case would proceed. And then in 2007, another San Luis Obispo judge lifted the stay and ordered that the sheriff's office provided a log of the contents in the criminal case file. In April 2021, Kristin's family also filed a complaint against Ruben Flores. In this complaint, they claim that Ruben moved Kristin's body from his home after the February 2020 search of his residence, and the complaint said that the action caused the family, quote, intentional infliction of emotional distress. In May, they actually filed an amended complaint claiming that Paul, his father Ruben, his mother Susan Flores, and Susan's boyfriend Mike moved the remains to another location. The Smarts family attorney James Murphy told KSBY News that a witness saw Ruben, Susan, and Mike working under Ruben's house during the night on or around February 9th, 2020. This is just days after the search warrant was served on the home. The Smart family believes that Kristin's body was removed to another location to cover up the murder of Kristin by Paul and cover up the other's complicity. Just a little bit of a side note. I must say I am a little surprised that they filed a civil case at the same time as the criminal case was going on, because two cases that I know where there were civil and criminal cases, we can think of the O.J. Simpson and then more recently the Bill Cosby case. The cases being filed the way they were had huge effects on the cases. So as we know, the O.J. Simpson case, there was the criminal case, and then after he was found not guilty, they filed a civil case where the family obtained a judgment saying that O.J. was responsible for the wrongful death of Ron and Nicole. If you look at another case, which was most recent, was the Bill Cosby case, he originally was investigated. Prosecutors released that they had no intent to seek a criminal action against him. He was then civilly deposed, and because at the time prosecution wasn't going to seek criminal charges, he no longer could plead the fifth, which was similar with OJ. Because he had already been found not guilty, there wasn't a chance, because of double jeopardy, that he could be charged criminally, so he couldn't plead the fifth, because pleading the fifth is to only protect yourself against criminal charges. When the press release was done that they were not intending to seek criminal charges and then he went to the civil deposition, he didn't have the ability to plead the fifth. And then he testified, and it was that testimony that when a following prosecutor reviewed the case and then did file charges, it was the testimony that he gave in the civil case was a major factor in him getting the guilty plea. And it was because of that sequence of events that his conviction was overturned. And that is why Bill Cosby was released. The court said, because you said that he wasn't a person of interest, that you weren't going to seek future charges against him, that is why he didn't plead the fifth. It's why he testified the way he did. And you can't use that information against him later. So, with all of that information, I'm semi-surprised that the civil cases are running at the same time as the criminal cases, because until and unless there is a resolution with the criminal case, Paul Flores has the ability, and Ruben Flores has the ability to plead the fifth. And I'm not sure how much a circumstantial case in the civil realm can proceed without any kind of testimony from Ruben or Paul. So it'll be interesting to see how each one of these cases move forward. So with all of these cases, the civil ones and the criminal one, it seems that the story revolving around the disappearance of Kristin Smart isn't ending anytime soon. We all know that court cases can take forever. In California, they take even longer. And then with all of this happening, with them being arrested in April of 2020, right amidst all of the pandemic things, and that really taking court matters, especially in California, and grinding them to a halt, everything has been just so slowed down. I don't see a resolution on any of these cases anytime soon. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Simply Imperfect Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here today and don't want to miss a future episode, please make sure to subscribe. If you're looking for show notes from today's episode, head on over to simplyimperfect.org. While you're at it, check out the links to all of our social media accounts and join our mailing list. The Simply Imperfect Podcast is a commentary channel. The statements and views are the creator's opinion, should not be considered fact, and are for entertainment purposes only. Please conduct your own research before making conclusions of your own.